This video is for the factoring trinomials where a does not equal 1 notes. Okay, so our first one here, we're going to use the factor method. So number 1 says, factor the following trinomial, 3x squared minus 24x plus 36. So we can see here right in front of the x, we don't have a 1, so we have to use different methods. So what we can do is we can find a common factor. And so here we do have a common factor of 3. So what I can do is I can divide each term by 3. So 3x squared divided by 3 gives me x squared. Negative 24 divided by 3 gives me a negative 8x. And then 36 divided by 3 gives me a positive 12. You can always go back and distribute this back out to check your work and make sure you end up where you started. So now, it says, what are the factors of 12 that add to give the coefficient of the middle term negative 8? So what numbers can I multiply together that'll give me 12 that if I add them, I'll get negative 8? So we know we're going to have some negative numbers here. So negative 3 times negative 4, that gives me 12. But if I add them, I don't get negative 8. I get a negative 7. So what about negative 2 times negative 6? And the reason I went straight into both of these being negative is because this is positive. So, and if you multiply two negatives, you get a positive. So negative 2 times negative 6 gives me a 12. Negative 2 plus negative 6 gives me a negative 8. And so those are my factors, negative 2 and negative 6. And so now I can set up the factors in the form of the GCF, the greatest common factor, and then x plus one of my factors, so x plus a negative 2, and then x plus my other factor, a negative 6. Now, this is awful messy, so we're going to clean this up. So we're going to keep the 3, but x plus a negative 2 is the same as x minus 2. X plus a negative 6 is the same as x minus 6. And so that is the factored form of this. And again, you can go back and you can work this. You can multiply these two polynomials together and then multiply the whole thing by 3 and make sure that you end up where you started. So let's try some out. So here we got to get rid of this 3. So 3 will go into 15, 3 will go into 12. So I'm going to factor that 3 out. And so I have x squared, 15 or negative 15 divided by 3 is a negative 5. 12 divided by 3 is a 4. All right, what two numbers multiply to make 4 but will add to get a negative 5? So negative 1 times a negative 4. Negative 1 times negative 4 gives me a positive 4. And then negative 1 plus negative 4 gives me a negative 5. So when I factor this, remember if it's negative, it'll be x minus 1 and x minus 4. All right, and the next one here, my a is a 2. 8's divisible by 2. Negative 10's divisible by 2. So we're going to pull that one out. All right, 8 divided by 2 is 4. Negative 10 divided by 2 is a negative 5. So now, two numbers that multiply to give me a negative 5, but will add to a 4. So I'm instantly going to go to 1 times 5. But 1 times 5 doesn't give me a negative 5. So if we do negative 1 times a positive 5, that gives me a negative 5. And then if I add them, negative 1 plus 5, I get a positive 4. So those are my two factors. So I have 2, and then x minus 1, and then x plus 5. All right, one more with 2 here as my leading coefficient. So we're going to factor that out. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 16 divided by 2 is 8. Okay, two numbers that multiply to give me 8 are 2 and 4. So let's see, 2 times 4 gives me 8, and then 2 plus 4 gives me 6, and that's what I need. So 2 times x plus 2 times x plus 4. So we can also use the box method, okay? So the first thing that we want to do is we want to check for a GCF. Is there a greatest common factor like there were here? 2 was the greatest common factor. 3 was the greatest common factor. So we're going to look at this one. We've got 15x squared plus x minus 2. 15 won't go into 1. 15 won't go into negative 2. There is no GCF here, okay? So when you don't have a GCF, this is the method you're going to want to use. When you do have a GCF, you might try this one first. So step 2 says enter the squared term. Enter the squared term in the first box and the constant term in the last box. So the first term is this 15x squared. The constant term is that negative 2. I'm going to put that there. And it says determine the factors of the product of the coefficient of the square term and the constant term that will subtract to give the coefficient of the middle term. So what it's asking is, well, let me show you something else. First, what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called A times C. So your values here, A is 15, B is a 1, and C is your constant term. Okay? So A times C, 15 times negative 2, gives me a negative 30. 30x squared. Okay? What I'm doing is I'm making this easier to deal with. Okay? So that I want to find the factors of negative 30x squared. By doing this, by multiplying A and C together, it's going to make my life easier down the road. So 30x squared, I could factor it into 6x and negative 5x. 6 times negative 5 is a negative 30, right? 6 times negative 5 equals a negative 30. And then 6 plus a negative 5 gives me that 1. This is also called the slip and slide method, which we'll talk about later as well. And so 6x minus 5x equals x, which is my b value. So I know that I have these factors, 6x and negative 5x. So I can plug these in my boxes here, and I can work backwards. Okay? So, oh, sorry. All right, so two numbers here that'll multiply to make a negative 2 are going to be negative 1 times a positive 2. So I know that I'm going to have a negative 1 and a positive 2 here. Okay? So what times negative 1 gives me a negative 5x? Well, that's going to be 5x. And then you can kind of check your other stuff too. What times 2 is going to give me a 6x? That's a 3x. And then 3x times 5x gives me 15x squared. So sometimes you just have to work with these and play around with the numbers. There are other methods that work so much better when we're factoring these trinomials where a is not a 1 value.